As we all know, life is full of compromise, and so is home cinema. Just take our system here for example. We've got one of the brand new Samsung Blu-ray players going into last year's award-winning 808 receiver, and between them they make for great movie soundtracks. The problem is that we also want great hi-fi, but our Marantz CD6003 here, which is a great CD player in its own right, is being slightly hamstrung by the Onkyo receiver, simply because surround sound amplifiers don't sound great in stereo. So here's what we're going to do about it. Add a stereo amp to our home cinema setup. If you're going to buy a new stereo amp just for this, it's well worth considering one with a feature called Unity Gain, which balances the volumes and will save you a fair amount of fiddling later. However, you can do this with an amp without Unity Gain, as we'll demonstrate with this Rotel RA06 SE. Now, the only way to set up a system like this is if you've got a receiver with a set of pre-outs. But thankfully those are getting pretty common, even on quite affordable receivers. And of course the Onkyo 808 does have a set right here. Now what we need to do is run a pair of analog interconnects between the front left and front right pre-outs here, and run them to one of the inputs on our stereo amp. Now if your stereo amp's got an AV input, that's the one to use. This Rotel hasn't, so we're just going to use the auxiliary input right here, like so. We now need to unplug the front left and front right speakers from our home cinema receiver and plug them into the speaker terminals on our stereo amp. Currently we've got a pair of analog interconnects between our CD player and our receiver. What we need to do is take those out of the receiver and put them into the CD input on our stereo amp. With our CD player now connected directly into our stereo amp, we switch this onto the CD input and we can use the two as a standard hi-fi system, and they'll completely leave the receiver out. Of course, we also want the whole lot to work together as a home cinema system. So first we need to turn the stereo amp onto the aux input. We then also need to move the volume control to a point that we're going to easily remember. You can just go to the 9 o'clock or 12 o'clock settings like we're doing here. And if you need to go for somewhere in between, just mark that with a sticker or a pen. You can now calibrate your speakers on your receiver as you usually would, either using a sound pressure level meter or a mic-driven setup if, like the Onkyo, it's got one of those. And that's essentially it. You can now listen to CDs in stereo without involving your receiver at all. And when you do want to watch a movie, you simply return your stereo amp to the auxiliary input, return the volume knob to the level you set earlier, and the two amps will share speaker duties. Of course, having to mess around with inputs and volume controls every time you want to watch a movie might be a bit too fiddly for some. But a good universal remote control with support for macros, something like a Logitech Harmony or a One4All Excite, should help with that. The other thing to bear in mind is that this isn't quite a best of both worlds approach. Yes, you will get better stereo sound, but you're going to sacrifice some surround sound cohesion to get that, even if you're careful to buy a stereo amp with a similar sonic signature to your receiver. Still, if you want the best of hi-fi but can't live without surround sound, this is well worth the effort.